It's great to welcome Thom Hartmann back to the program. Thom hosts the Thom Hartmann program and is also author of the Hidden History series. The latest book in the series is The Hidden History of Big Brother in America: How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Thom, always great speaking to you.
Hey, David, great to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
So, James Gleick wrote this book, The Information, and one of the things that Gleick writes in the book is that for as long as there has been any communication technology, think drums to communicate over long distances in the African savannah, there has also been the ability to surveil, intercept, send confusing messages to trick those wishing to communicate in that method. And you can sort of follow that with every communications technology up through today. When and how would you say that what we might consider the modern kind of surveillance and lack of privacy apparatus really got going in the United States?
It was in the late 90s. Prior to 1996, the internet operated under the same telecommunications rules as telephone companies, and this went back to the 1930s. To this day, if you're on a phone call with somebody and it's actually being carried over cell towers, it's not a VoIP call, it's not a voice over internet call, because the rules for the internet are now different. But if you're talking to somebody on a cell tower or on a regular phone, for the phone company to listen in, for the government to listen in, for any third party to listen in, they have to have a warrant. There has to be a legal basis for that intrusion. In 1996, with the Telecommunications Act, Section 230 said we're going to drop that for the internet. So that's one piece of it. The other is, or another metaphor that to kind of explain where we're at, is that prior to 1996, the rules for people who host sites on the internet were very similar to the rules for people who own disco clubs, dance venues, bars, restaurants, or your home. I mean, if you, David, were to put a sign out in front of your house that said, "Hey, big party on Saturday, come on in," and just leave the front door open, and you're sitting in your living room Saturday afternoon, the sun's going down, there's somebody raping a woman in the back room, there's a bunch of people shooting up heroin over in the corner, there's a guy in the other back room who's selling illegal pornography, and the police bust in. They would not only arrest all those people, they would arrest you as the host of the party.
Right.
You have a responsibility for what happens in your house that you know about. And that was, this goes back to British common law, back to literally the 10th century. So Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 said that's still true for your house. It's still true for a bar. It's still true for a restaurant. It's still true for a civic center, but it's not true for anybody who builds a house on the internet. And thus, Mark Zuckerberg became one of the wealthiest men in the world. He built a house and he said, "Hey, come on in and have a party." And he largely ignored the people who were shooting heroin in the corner and selling, they eventually started cracking down. Obviously, they were from the beginning and on the obvious stuff. But even now, there's just, this new report that January 6th was largely planned on Facebook. And this isn't just to trash Facebook. I'm not, he's playing by the rules. And that's the problem. When you have capitalism in a republic, the job of government is to set the rules so that capitalism can work in a way that doesn't damage society. And we have failed in that regard in this context.
So the Republicans during the Trump era talked a lot about Section 230, and some of them seemed to think that if the platforms had greater liability for the content that was posted, that it would benefit the right in some way, I guess because they believed that the left is regularly defaming and slandering and so on and so forth. But they seem to sort of misunderstand the true impact that changing Section 230 would have, do they not?
Yeah, I think the right's embrace of changes in Section 230 came along with Donald Trump complaining about how he was being treated by social media.
Right.
And they thought somehow if they repealed that part of Section 230, that, a thousand flowers would bloom or something. I don't know. I've never seen the logic in it. Josh Hawley actually wrote one of the better books about the horrors of Section 230. The last half of the book is mostly a screed about how liberals want to destroy America. But the first part of his book is a really good description of the problems and what's going on and why. And you've got people like Ron Wyden, my senator here in Oregon, is one of the leaders of the effort to change Section 230. But it is bipartisan. Josh Hawley's on board too. Back in 1980 or 81, I started running forums for CompuServe. Nigel Peacock, who's still my webmaster, and he lives in the UK. We were running forums. We had like 30 of them, the IBM PC forum, the Macintosh forum, the JFK assassination forum, the UFO forum, the ADHD forum. We had a whole bunch of them. And CompuServe paid us well. I mean, we had a staff. We had about 30 people volunteer. They weren't volunteers. We paid them who were working with us. And it was a fair amount of money that CompuServe was paying us, because this was before Section 230, and they built this house. This was before HTML. This was before the web as we know it today. And CompuServe and AOL were pretty much the only game in town. And so because they had built a house on the internet, they had responsibility for what happened in that house. And so we were the ones who were kind of the hall monitors. And in 1996, when Section 230 passed, basically they laid us all off. That was or they stopped paying us.
Right. You could keep working, but we're no longer going to. Yeah. There's progressive, conservative, and libertarian perspectives in terms of opposition to the sort of surveillance that we now know takes place, but they're sort of different principles. It's sort of like with flat Earth. You talk to 4 flat earthers, they all believe the Earth is flat, but for conflicting and sometimes very, very different reasons. And progressives, conservatives, and libertarians have different reasons for opposing the practices that we see now. Can you talk a little bit about those different perspectives?
With regard to Section 230, or just more generally?
More generally.
With regard to seeing things. Well, I think to the extent that, and we're seeing this in particular with Republicans across the country tightening the screws on your right to vote, that the for lack of a better phrase, the police state aspect of, because in my book I basically break out 2 kinds of Big Brother. There's the state Big Brother, which is what George Orwell wrote about, and then there's the corporate Big Brother, which George Orwell hadn't anticipated, and which is actually at the moment far more aggressive, or at least the tip of the iceberg above. I mean, Ed Snowden kind of showed us what government was up to, but so anyway, the right seems to be embracing kind of the police state tactics with regard to voting, and would be, or generally are, more inclined to not so much embrace police state tactics on the internet, but to say that if the billionaires who are running big social media sites want to do what they want to do, they should be allowed to do it. There's just this reflexive thing against regulation. Libertarians, pretty much the same thing. I mean, libertarians, the Libertarian Party was a scam. It was created in the 1940s by the real estate lobby as a way to provide a political cover for basically deregulation of the industry. And they thought of it as a scam themselves. I think it still is to a large extent. The idea that a country can work with nothing but the military and the police being provided by the government and the courts. But I think most Democrats are slowly beginning to realize or understanding my party metaphor, really. I mean, this is really what it is that you have to have rules for the game. The NFL defines the rules for football. And if the NFL went all libertarian, they or all Republican, as it were, they could say, they would probably change their rules to say, well, whichever team gives the biggest contribution to the guys on our board of directors gets an extra player on the field throughout the game. We can tweak things if there's enough money involved and that kind of thing. That's sadly, and that's what they've done. I mean, you got Rick Scott's new 11-point plan promoting deregulation of the polluters, right? Because they're big campaign donors to the Republican Party. So, with regard to privacy in the United States, I think the dynamic is just very similar, David.
When it comes to, in Europe, we've got the GDPR. California passed the Consumer Privacy Act in 2018, so at least people know what personal data is being collected about them. Are those types of laws significant and impactful, or do they give people maybe some kind of false sense that something is being done?
They are significant. They do have impact. These are those laws are why when you visit websites that want to do business in California or in Europe, they will say, "Will you accept cookies?"
Right.
It's like a flag. It's a way of saying, "Well, yeah, there is something going on here. We are sort of spying on you or keeping track of you, or or maybe it's just to help your experience." And in some cases, it is actually. But in any case, I think that's something that we need to really seriously look at, is in particular the European rules. And the one there's a whole chapter about this in my book. In Europe, that we definitely do not have here is the right to be forgotten. This came out of a 2018 lawsuit, or maybe it was 2008. No, I'm sorry, I'd have to look up the year, but there was a Spanish guy who discovered that whenever he Googled his name, he had gone through a rough divorce and bankruptcy back in like 1998, and lost his property, lost his business. And when he Googled his name, he had a real low profile guy. And when he Googled his name, that was pretty much all that came up. And it looked really bad on him, and it was impeding his ability to get a date and find a job. And so he asked Google to delete that from their search, things that came up when his name was put in. Google kind of laughed at him. He sued in Spain, and European court went along with him, and now you've got this the right to be forgotten across Europe, where if you don't like what is being said about you on the internet, you can't necessarily always petition individual websites to take down the content about you, but you can ask the search engines to no longer deliver it to people. And that's a pretty consequential thing. And I know a lot of people in the United States would probably very much appreciate that, particularly people who have been the victim of what's the phrase for when mostly men are outing, old girlfriends with porn pictures and things like that.
Oh yeah. What is the term for that? I don't remember the term. Yeah.
It's like revenge porn, I think
Yeah.
is the phrase. Yeah. So anyhow, that's something that we should seriously look at as well.
If last thing I want to touch on, if the direction that things have been going isn't resisted in some of the ways we've talked about and that you write in the book, what's sort of at the tail end of it? I mean, is it the direction of like the Chinese social credit system? Everybody has some different idea of what they believe would be sort of at the end of this. What do you think would happen if this goes unopposed?
We already have a business version of the Chinese social credit system. And there are companies that brag that they have 10, 15, 20,000 data points on every single one of us. They know our most subtle preferences. They know if we've, for example, if they're providing information to a company that's trying to decide whether to answer your customer service call in 2 rings or in 2 hours. You can tell that company if you have recently browsed the website of that company's competitors. So are you one of those people who's calling in and saying, "Hey, I'd like that price match"? Well, you get to wait 2 hours. Or if you're a regular customer of that company, it's just really, really granular data. Yeah. And some of which could be used to, basically harass or embarrass people, as well as to increase the profits of companies. So, and similarly, there are companies that specifically market, this kind of social credit score, and it's not just your finances. It's not just whether you paid your credit card on time. It's, whether you've ever been arrested for drunk driving, or whether you've ever been in an altercation with anybody, or, how you behaved online in some cases. They're selling this information to employers. They're selling this information to landlords. They're selling this information to retail companies. They're selling this company to companies, to cell phone companies and airlines and everybody else who get calls from customers. There's the potential for abuse is extraordinary. And I'm not saying that it's not appropriate to do that. If I was a landlord, I would like to know if the person who wants to rent an apartment trashed the last one and left
Sure.
dog poop all over.
Right.
That's not unreasonable. But there have to be reasonable limits on this stuff, and there are none right now.
The book is The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. The book's author is Thom Hartmann. Thom, always appreciate your time.
Thank you, David. It's always a great honor and pleasure to be here with you.